Britanska dobrotvorna organizacija Sjećanje na Srebrenicu već nekoliko godina organizira posjete Bosni i Hercegovini sa posebnim akcentom na boravak u Srebrenici, posjetu Memorijalnom Centru u Potočarima i susret sa preživjelim Srebreničanima. I ove godine, u susret 20. godišnjici genocida nad Bošnjacima Srebrenice, ova je organizacija u Bosnu i Hercegovinu dovela istaknute članove škotskog društva, političare, vjerske službenike, novinare. O važnosti ovakvih posjeta, kao i općenito o situaciji u Bosni i Hercegovini i regionu, ali i o nekim unutarnjim škotskim temama, razgovarali smo sa Lornom Hood, nekadašnjom moderatoricom škotske crkve, Ruth Davidson, koja je na čelu škotskih konzervativaca, i Lordom Jamesom Wallaceom, liderom liberalnih demokrata u Domu lordova Britanskog parlamenta. Razgovor je snimljen u Sarajevskoj galeriji 11.7.1995.
Thank you very much for your time and, of course, very welcome to our TV show. And on the beginning, Mrs. Hood, this is not your first visit to Srebrenica. Could you tell us how important for you is your reunion with that town and survivors?
Yeah, thank you. It was really important to go back. I was here last year, just at this time, and met with the mothers of Srebrenica and did the tour of the cemetery, Potočarima, etc. So I was delighted that I was able to bring out a delegation this time. And I thought, I didn't think I'd be immune to it, but I thought I would be much more prepared. It wouldn't affect me as much as it did the first time I was hearing. I was wrong. I was so wrong, because I felt I was going back to people almost that I knew, and they welcomed me back. And I felt again, perhaps even more so, their pain and their sorrow, and we shared that again with them, and it just opened up all the feelings I'd had before. There was such a welcome from them. They were so glad to see us coming back. They're also very grateful for the work that's been done in the past year and the way we have told people about what happened and the story there. But I wasn't prepared for the way I would feel again at this situation, and to go through with them again what they had experienced. And I think it was perhaps even, it meant more to me this time, because I was ready for it, and I could understand it more, but I certainly felt their pain and their sorrow.
Ms. Davidson, you placed a photo of Srebrenica cemetery on your Twitter account and wrote, "No words." But what key messages does Srebrenica send today?
Well, I wrote that because 140 characters can tell you only so much, and we have learned so much since we've been here. I thought I knew about Srebrenica. I remember it on the news when I was a teenager. I remember, I've read about it since. I read more before I came here, but nothing prepared me for being here. And I think the messages that we have to take from this is you cannot ever look away. You must see the past of your own country and of other people's countries. You must look with honest eyes and must try hard to never make the same mistakes as we've made before.
Lord Wallace, so many times after the Second World War, we heard never again, but it happened. What is your opinion on the responsibility on the international community for the genocide in Srebrenica and Bosnian War generally?
Well, you're right. People did say after the Second World War, after Auschwitz, Belsen, never again. And yet twice within, 50 years within our continent, these events happened. And I think it does give us cause to take stock. I was asking myself, I've been pointed in the direction of Kofi Annan's report, which I certainly will read when I return to the United Kingdom. And I'm sure there's lessons there for the whole international community. I was certainly during that time, I was in the House of Commons, my own party leader, Paddy Ashdown, was regularly raising the issue of Bosnia. And that certainly made me very aware. But I think even what struck me coming out to Srebrenica, to Bosnia-Herzegovina this week, is a number of people who didn't quite remember, who you had to remind them of what had happened, and I think that's what we see. I certainly see as one of the purposes of being here is for me to experience, to talk, for example, to the mothers of Srebrenica, and to go back and to remind people, so that when we say never again, we can remind people what happened. And you go back to I think it was the late 18th century. There was a British member of I think it was an Irish member of the British House of Commons, Edmund Burke, who said, "For evil to succeed, it only requires good men, and probably today you'd add, and women, to stay silent." I think that's something we should remember.
Mrs. Hood, you are a minister, and what can religious leaders and religious communities do to facilitate reconciliation and help people come to terms with the past, especially here in this part of the world where some religious leaders promoted hatred?
I think we have an extremely important role to make our faiths understood on the basis of our faith. And if you look at the faiths, whether it is Christianity or Judaism or Islam, then at the basis of that faith is belief in a one God, and a one God who talks about love and all people being equal. And unless we promote that, unless we talk about that, then we are really denying our faith. And I don't think there is anyone who can look at either of any of those major faiths and see the kind of hatred that we have witnessed in the genocide in Srebrenica, or we're witnessing today in different parts of the world. And it needs people who are in leadership roles, in those strong positions in the church, to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is not what our faith is about. You're talking about hatred, you're talking about killing, you're talking about murder. That has no place in our faith. And we cannot be silent about that, and we must speak out about it. And then we have to help people to understand, although there are differences, we still have that oneness. Although there are differences, we are still human beings, and I would say children of the one God. And therefore, to not only understand our differences, but to accept our differences. The one thing that has always come home to me when we met with the mothers of Srebrenica, there is no revenge. There is no desire for revenge. And that is a good sign for the future, because when there is hatred and revenge, then that spiral will only continue.
It's a perfect point, yeah.
It will only continue. And so therefore there has to be that point where we accept what has happened, but we move on from it, and we move on from it in a way that we understand one another, and we understand by standing in one another's shoes. And I think that's why it's important for us to come out here and touch what these people have been through, so that we can talk about it, but we can also talk about it in a way that says, not for revenge, but for an acceptance of the past and what has happened, and how do we move on from there? How do we move on from there, accepting one another, accepting our differences, and yet living together, educating our young people, helping them to be together. That's the way. But as religious leaders, particularly those who have a very strong voice in the religious community, to say this is wrong, this is not part of our faith, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, Islam, this is not part of our faith. Our faith is based in love. God created us in love, and we have to show that love for one another. Everything else is secondary.
Ms. Davison, how do you see progress in this country? Is it better, worse, or status quo? Where is Bosnian society heading?
I think the progress is lopsided. I think some things have gotten better very quickly. I think some things are taking a long time to catch up. I think the Dayton Accords work to bring a peace of a sort, but have created problems from the way in which peace was managed in terms of the political situation. And from the people I've spoken to since I was here, there seems to be a frustration with the political classes in Bosnia-Herzegovina to move forward and to work for the people rather than to work for themselves. Now, I have spent very little time here in this visit. I can't talk with great authority, but the people who I've spoken to have made this point to me again and again. So I think that while the infrastructure is improving...
What people say concretely?
Well, exactly. And I mean, you can physically see buildings that have been rebuilt or repaired. You can physically see roads that have been paved. You can see phone lines or tram lines. You can see infrastructure. You can see improvement that way. But what you can't see is a society that is creating jobs for so many of your young people, which is making sure that there is an equity across the people in this country. And I think you have to have trust in the leaders of your country to really move on as a country.
All the time we repeated reconciliation, reconciliation. Did you see, during your short visiting in Bosnia and Herzegovina, elements of reconciliation?
I saw people who had an amazing capacity to feel hurt and pain, but to not seek revenge in the way that the Reverend Hood was talking about there, to want to remember and to find out about people that they had lost, but to not try and refight that battle again or to strike out against the people that had hurt them and their families. And I think that speaks to a huge capacity for courage in your country and your people, and forgiveness in your country and your people, and that should be welcomed. I think in terms of reconciliation, that happens on both sides. There must be an admission of what happened from all sides. There must be a recognition and an acceptance of the part that everybody played. And that includes people in the West and under the UN banner as well.
Lord Wallace, is the integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina into Europe possible within a reasonable time frame?
The short answer to that is I don't know, and I think there's a number of candidate countries for the European Union, and I think it would be folly to try and predict dates. What I do know is that there's been a very recent initiative by our own British Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, and the German Foreign Secretary, which is trying to look at it as in a new way. I think stressing the importance of the social and the economic agenda, and I hope that can actually, lead on to that progress can be made by going down that line. I think it's always very difficult and probably wrong for people to come from another country and to start saying what should be done in someone else's country. But I've been told several times over the last couple of days about the high levels of unemployment, and therefore, the importance, I think, of trying to pursue an economic agenda and social agenda to try and address some of these basic economic issues. Finding people jobs must be an important one.
Mrs. Hood, what are, in your opinion, you mentioned some things before, but what are, in your opinion, the most important fundamental requirements for building a democratic society in Bosnia and Herzegovina and for true reconciliation? Again, reconciliation between different ethnic groups here, between different ideologies.
I think, as Ruth said just a few minutes ago, there has to be an acceptance on all sides as to what actually happened. There has to be an acceptance of the genocide, and there has to be recognition of the hurt and the pain that was caused on both sides. And I think only until that happens can people really begin to move forward. To find that equality, that acceptance, where it is simply you're a human being, regardless of whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jew. And until we can take those barriers away, I don't think we can build that democratic society. Until we have integration in our schools, until children learn just to accept one another for what they are, rather than the name that is put upon them.
So do you think that focus must be on young people, on education in this country?
I think that's very much the answer to it. The mothers of Srebrenica will talk about the past, and they will feel the pain and the sorrow, because they do want justice. They do want not revenge, as I said, but an acceptance. But they also know that for their children coming up, their grandchildren, great-grandchildren even, they don't want them to go through that again. They don't want them to experience what they experienced. And that can only happen through the school system, through the education, through young people just accepting one another as a young person and learning to live together that way. And it's hard for us to understand, I think, the hatred that was there. It's hard to understand how someone that you lived with, who was a neighbour, and then, you know, a month or so later, there's the hatred there for that person. I find that so difficult to contemplate, to understand why that should happen. And I think the only answer is through our education system, the education system that you have, that's not different schools and different systems, but people living together, learning together, so that they actually get to the point they don't actually know whether you're Christian or Muslim, and they don't actually care whether you're Christian or Muslim, but they see you as simply another human being. And until we can do that, until we can find that oneness, then I don't think we can have a society where there is that equality. And of course there has to be, in the political agenda, the political realm, there has to be that agreement, that willingness to do that there are positions that are there, and someone gets the position simply because of their ability, their gifts, their talents, not because of their name, not because of their background. And until we can find that, I think we have our problems, and these problems will remain.
How is really important to discuss, to talk, and to put some concrete things on agenda when we talk about neighbors, when we talk about this part of the world, countries in this part of the world, of Western Balkans?
Well, I think if you look right across all of the Balkans, actually, not just the Western Balkans, because of the immediate history and also the history that goes back many hundreds of years, that is often used in your more recent history. When you're looking at cooperation, economic, trading, all the rest of it, you have to, in some ways, make sure that you don't go back and fight the arguments that you used to fight. If you're doing regional cooperation between nations, between cantons even, within Bosnia-Herzegovina, you have to make sure that you are making practical steps and that you're explaining to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, because part of the reason that trust breaks down is because those conversations don't happen, because the explanation isn't there. People make the worst possible suspicion of the other person. And to rebuild trust, you have to make sure that you have that level of cooperation and you build it on practical foundations.
Lord Wallace, you are from a complexly constituted country. Scotland has implemented, as we know, referendum, and the citizens decided to stay within the UK. To which extent can the British-Scottish model stand as an example to others in terms of internal relations regulation?
Well, I think it's always very difficult to project from one country onto another, because each country's got its own history, it's got its own constitutional arrangements. Where we were in Scotland was that Scotland and England voluntarily agreed a union back in 1707. Ireland came in 1801. When our Scottish National Party won a majority of seats in the Scottish Parliament, they had a commitment to hold a referendum. The Scottish Parliament itself, we believe and argued, didn't have the powers to hold that referendum, but there was a negotiation between the Scottish Government and the United Kingdom Government, and an agreement was reached whereby the powers were given to allow the referendum to proceed. It was a legal referendum. The parties were agreed that on its legal basis and agreed to accept its outcome. Now, I argued very passionately for Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom. I think we've actually created probably one of the best economic, social, monetary unions in history, and why break it up? But I think it's very difficult to take that position and then just extend it to other places. I mean, for example, there's continuing debate in Catalonia and Spain, but the Spanish constitution is different, the history is different, and that's why I think you've always got to tread very warily and taking the experience of one country and trying to project it onto another.
Ms. Davidson, how much does Scotland's case stand apart from other cases in Europe, and in particular, can it be compared with the Balkans, especially for Bosnia and Herzegovina?
For Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like Lord Wallace, I think that Scotland is very different. The United Kingdom is the nation state. But within that nation state, there were 4 distinct nations that have always been distinct nations. So Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland have a very, very long history. And even though we chose and volunteered to go into a union with England in 1603, it was a royal union. In 1707, it was a political union, and we wanted to do that. We kept things for ourselves. So we have never had the same school system as England. We have never had the same laws as England. We've always had separate laws. So we've always kept different identities within that, but have chosen to be a nation within a nation state. And I don't see Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland as a model replicated anywhere else in the world. I don't see that equal nations within a nation state replicated anywhere. And I think that our history is very unique to the Scottish nation, and I think that the Bosnian history is very unique to Bosnia and the Western Balkans.
But Lord Wallace, what is your view of the, maybe more concretely, on the secessionist movements in some part of Europe? And very concretely, what do you think about the referendum threats for the secession of Republika Srpska from Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, my government is very clear that the agreement that was reached at Dayton in 1995 is one which ought to be adhered to, and that doesn't really make room for secession. And I think our government has made that very, very clear indeed. And I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure you can't really compare what happened in Scotland with what the situation is here. It's entirely different, not only in a long historical perspective, but also in a very recent historical perspective.
Mrs. Hood, unfortunately, we are witnesses of wars, currently wars, terrorist attacks, painful from all over the world.
Humanity always has different depths. And I think when you come to Srebrenica, I've always said you touch evil, and you're reminded that humanity can sink to depths of evil that sometimes we can't even imagine. That happened in Auschwitz, and we said never again. We thought when we saw it, we thought never, that can't happen again. But when you come to Srebrenica, we know that it has happened again. And when you're there, you touch evil, you smell evil, it's there. And you realise the depths to which humanity can sink. But the other side of that is I have also seen the dedication, the commitment of people like the ICMP, the International Commission of Missing Persons, the way they have gone about identifying the remains. Over 7,000 of the remains have been identified, and mothers have been able to bury their loved ones. And there's been that commitment and that dedication and that gifts and talents that they have used to help humanity. So there always will be the 2 sides of humanity. We can go down to the very depths of evil, and we can also rise to the heights. And we have to find a way in the world that we will strive always through our children, through the education, through understanding one another, to reach the heights, to accept that the basis of those of us who have faith is in a love and a forgiveness and reconciliation, and always promote those things, but always, always aware that there is within all of us that capacity for evil, and that capacity that we can go down to the depths. And we have seen that in history throughout the world, not just in Germany, but throughout the Crusades and different things that have happened in history. Humanity is not perfect. And within us, there are those 2 bits that fight with us all the time. In our faith, we have St. Paul who said, the evil I see, I don't want to do, I do. The good that I want to do, I don't do it. So I think as human beings, we must always be aware of that capacity within us. And at times in our history, we see that capacity winning rather than the good within us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this interview, and once again, thanks a lot for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.